I wrote the book Twice a Slave. It's a novel based on a historical character that is unknown in American history, but had made a great impact. Joseph Willis was a Cherokee, born of a Cherokee slave, and he was born into slavery, lived in slavery. His father freed him on his deathbed, but his uncle kept him in slavery on his own property. He should have been an extremely wealthy man, but he was kept there. But he fled in the novel to Runway to work with Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox. And then he comes to know Christ in the book that I wrote, and he then goes and he's the first preacher west of the Mississippi River. He preaches in Louisiana Territory before Louisiana was a part of the United States, and some of that is historical fact, some of it's fiction, and so we've just created a novel based on his life. My colleague that I worked with, Randy Willis, is the fourth great-grandson of Joseph Willis and gave valuable information about his life, and so we put together this novel that's an intriguing, fascinating story about a mixed race, Cherokee English person who became very famous in preaching the gospel and bringing the gospel of Christ back in the early days of American history. My first book was really my life story that I co-wrote with Jerry Jenkins. Jerry Jenkins, you know from the Left Behind series, and I had been arrested in Chicago for preaching the gospel, and Jerry heard about it. He was a young reporter at the time, and they sent him out to interview me, and after an interview he says, "You need to have a book." And I said, "Well, I'm not a writer." He said, "Well, I am." And so we teamed together and wrote what was then Sammy Tippit, God's Love in Action, and since that time we've republished it. It's now God's Secret Agent, and it's been there. So that started me down the writing path. And a few years after that, I went to Jerry when he was publisher at Moody Press and said, "I've got a book burning in my heart that I want to write." I had been into communist countries in Eastern Europe and wrote Fire in Your Heart, a book on spiritual awakening that I saw taking place in those countries and then in Eastern Europe. And so as a result of that went well. I wrote another book, The Prayer Factor, and so I wrote a lot of nonfiction. So I have about 13 nonfiction books, but Twice a Slave is the first attempt to write a fiction piece, and they're all really built around, and the theme for all of them is spiritual awakening, renewal, personal renewal, and the need for a great move of God in our own lives, in our communities, and in our nation. So I've written 14 books now, and this is my first novel. When people read Twice a Slave, there's several things they're going to, I think, experience. One is the power of forgiveness. Joseph Willis, who was held on his own property as a slave, he should have been freed, he wasn't, and yet he had the power to forgive, and it was that power of forgiveness that enabled him to achieve greatness, and it was because he experienced God's forgiveness. And so as people read this book, I know that there's going to be a tremendous work in their lives to show the way of forgiveness, the courage to forgive, to release bitterness in your life, also to overcome adversity. Joseph lived into his 90s, and he was married 4 times, not because of divorce and remarriage like we have so much of today, but because 3 of his wives died while he was trying to serve God, and how he was able to find the strength in the midst of tragedy, trying to do God's will. This man who had been so unjustly treated, and how the courage and the faith was molded in his life to achieve greatness. So greatness can be found and greatness can be achieved. And that's what I hope people will come away with, is that greatness can be found and achieved through what Christ did on the cross, experiencing forgiveness in our own lives and finding the power to overcome adversity.